Hello again.
Hello. Hi everyone, it's the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we missed last week. It was just really super busy.
Yes.
And it didn't happen for a variety of reasons, but we're happy to be back. Hello again.
Hello, and we're here to talk. We thought we would do a little big book summer recap, which is why you see like a book, because we got so many big books sitting in front of us.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes.
what we ended up reading and what we maybe wish we had or didn't or did or
Right.
surprises.
Yeah.
So-
Big book summer ended on Labor Day weekend, early September. So yeah, we just thought we'd kind of rehash that a little bit.
Yeah. Should we start with the one that we're both have?
Yes, this is one we both read. Fellowship Point, Alice Elliott Dark. Really
Yes.
loved it.
Yeah, I
enjoyed
really
it.
did. And we did a buddy read with our friend Kate. We were supposed to meet and talk about it, which got a little bit waylaid because I ended up in Michigan for most of the
Yeah.
summer. But I really loved it too. It surprised me. It
Mhm.
wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
Did you feel that way?
I felt that way, totally.
Yeah.
It's a really lovely story about two women who've been pretty much lifelong friends. They're in their 70s, 80s now.
They live in an area in the summer called Fellowship Point that's off the coast of Maine, and then also spend the winter months in Philly.
Yeah, and one of their great grandfathers, I think, is the one who settled Fellowship Point. And it had important Native American traditions there, and it's also like a bird sanctuary. So there is some tension for sure with environmental things,
Yes.
and then some interpersonal stress as well. But overall, really a wonderful story with delightful characters facing both lovely things in their lives and not so hot
Yes.
things in their lives. And one of the characters is a writer, which I really love to read books about writers.
Yes, and she's kind of one of those that writes under a pen name and people don't know about it.
Yeah,
Which I thought was pretty cool.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this was our biggest one.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many pages is that one that you have there.
Well, I have the hardback. I don't know if it's different. It's just close to 600.
Okay. Yeah, this is 576
Yep,
pages.
that's what mine is too.
So
Yeah.
that was our biggest, I believe.
Fellowship Point.
Yeah. And we also read another one that was over 400, Nora Roberts, The Awakening. This is a book that we read for Book Cougars' Year of Reading Romance. It was our second
Yes.
quarter pick.
And it's the first book in a trilogy, and it's a fantasy novel. Thus, The Dragon.
Yeah.
It's the Dragon Heart Legacy, Book 1.
Oh, another book with Philadelphia origins.
Oh,
I
that's
didn't
right.
make that connection until just now.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's Philadelphia is where the main character is from, and then there's bits of it in Ireland, and then also in a fantasy world that is accessed through a tree
In Ireland.
in Ireland.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was fun. I enjoyed that one.
I did too, and it led to probably one of our best Zoom conversations. We do quarterly read-alongs and then have a Zoom conversation with listeners, and there was a lot to talk about with this one.
Yes, there was.
Yes.
What is that next to the N? I never noticed that. What is that?
It just says NR, Nora Roberts.
Oh, okay. Never noticed that
Yeah,
before.
maybe it's like Nora Roberts has her own logo.
Her own initials.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are really popular, right? Monographed robes and
Right.
everything
Yes.
back in the day.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we have a third
Oh,
one
yeah,
that we
that's
actually
right.
read together. The Lost Boy of Santa Konia. This is by Juliet Grames, who was our guest on an episode of the podcast. Love this one too.
Yes.
It's set in Italy, southern Italy.
Right. And it's about a young woman who goes to Italy. She's an American, and she is a college graduate and goes there to open up a preschool. And there's been quite a lot of flooding in this little town, and a skeleton emerges in the flood.
Yeah. And it has a lot of like politics of the place, because this is at a time, it's like post-war Italy, and there's a lot of movements to get people to move away from the mountains to settle in cities and the coastal areas. So there's some national politics that come into play as well as the local politics.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll put a link down below to our conversation with Juliet. Very interesting. What inspired her to write the novel. And we also talk about lentils. They eat a lot of lentils in this book, including lentil bread, which I'd never heard of. So wonderful. Highly recommend. I read another one that was not on my original wish list. Reminder, we have a video where we talked about our hopefuls. Mm-hmm. This was not on it. I was in Michigan visiting my daughter, and I went to Horizon Books, and I saw a copy of this, and it caught my eye. And then I just got online and got it through Hoopla as an audiobook and listened to it and loved it. I got a copy of it out of the library just to show people. It's a romance about a traveling nurse and a gentleman that both suffer from the same curse, which is that when they date somebody, they break up, and then that person finds their true love. So they figure maybe they could date each other, and then they would both find their true love. Maybe their true love is each other. But I will say there's a ton of substance to this book. It really deals with some mental health issues. It deals with having a toxic mother, and having to raise your teenage siblings, having to work on yourself and your emotional fortitude, I guess is the right word, so that you can be in a relationship with somebody else. You know, Chris and I have a saying, if you don't do your work, mm-hmm. you can't really be in relationship with anybody. And I feel like the author, Abby Jimenez, really handled that well in this novel. Unbeknownst to me, it is the third book in a trilogy. I had no idea. I stepped into this as a standalone and loved it. I heard an author interview with Abby Jimenez, and she said that there are characters that travel into this novel from those other ones, but that of course, she thinks you should read all three. Most authors do, but you'd be fine to just read this alone. I'm here to tell you because that's what I did. Nice.
And do you think you'll read the other ones? Or not tempted at this point?
She's such a good writer. I might be tempted. Okay. That's a good question. I'll have to read about what they're about. Okay. You know, I have so many romance novels I want to read. Yeah. So we'll see. All right. But I mean, captivating story. And I walked and listened a lot of hours to it and really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. I'm sorry they put the sticker on the cute cover.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't have the other books with me that I read, but I'll pop a little cover image up here. So I read Looking for Love in All the Haunted Places. That was a fun, romance with otherworldly elements. That was by Claire Kahn, and really enjoyed it. It's a haunted house story that has a love relationship happening or not, and it was cute. And it had some depth to it as well. And so it has queer elements, and people of color are main characters, and it's just really great diversity.
Oh, my next one. Oh, I don't have it either. I'm reaching. I took off my daughter's bookshelves The Snow Child by Aowen Ivy. Mm-hmm. And this was one of her favorite novels of all time, and I always wanted to read it. So good. And that one I did also listen to the audiobook and read the paperback, which my daughter had. And it's about a couple who is in the wilds of Alaska. They've moved there. It's very cold and dark, and they had lost a child. A little content warning, the wife is suffering from suicidal ideation when they first arrive in Alaska. And she wakes up one morning and sees a child out playing in the snow with a fox. And the story changes from there. And it is based on a Russian fairy tale, so you're not quite sure if the child is real or not throughout the whole story. And some bits of the Russian fairy tale are woven throughout. Really beautiful. I enjoyed it.
The other book that I read that was over 400 pages is Moby Dick by Herman Melville, because I attended the marathon reading at Mystic Seaport Museum, which was a lot of fun. So I'm counting that as having read it, and I also read it in the spring. So
she did a double read of Moby Dick in 2024.
Yeah, it's been the year of Moby Dick. So, yes. And that one I didn't have on my list of hopefuls. It just happened. And one that I did have on my list of hopefuls that I started was The Woman's Room by Marilyn French. And this is a novel that was super popular. My mom, my older sister, everybody was reading this novel back in the day, and I thought I'd give it a go. And I just really, I was into it for a while, but then it just really got to me because it's about women before the second wave feminist movement really took off. And so it's about a lot of women who are suffering because they're living under a patriarchal system that they don't really understand yet. So they don't really understand why they're feeling miserable and frustrated, or they really know why.
Yeah.
And they're trying to talk about it, but there's in some ways not a level of language or understanding yet. So it was a tough read, and I decided, I just can't right now. So I put it down. I will maybe get to it eventually, but I really don't think I will. I think it's one that I think it's one I'm aware of enough that I'm not tempted anyway right now to go back. But it made me think about, while I was preparing to talk about these books, it made me think about our most recent read-along book that we read for our Year of Reading Romance, Envy by Sandra Brown. And we had a really great conversation the other night with a lot of listeners who read it with us of different ages. And it's dated. It is definitely dated. It was written, it came out in 2001. The action is set in the 1980s and 90s. So there are a lot of stereotypical, I shouldn't say stereotypical, there's a lot of like sexism and homophobia and anti-Semitism that was more rampant in the culture back in the day, and people used it to blackmail people or to keep people in the place that they wanted them to be kept. And I'm not saying that stuff doesn't exist now, because it certainly does. But it was more acceptable in mainstream society anyway back then.
Yeah.
So I can understand, like, because some listeners had issues with that. They, like Emily and I read it, and we placed it in its context. And we were also, I was a young adult in the 80s. I was in high school, so I kind of had the experience of it too in some ways. It was familiar. Yeah. Familiar.
Yeah.
And some of the younger readers maybe didn't feel that way. And then some of the older readers were like, they loved it. She's like, she's a kick-ass character, you know? So I think that generational difference in perspectives is really interesting with Envy.
And I also think, like, the reason you put down the women's room was a little bit different probably than the reason you were willing to carry forth with this, because it does have to do with the story.
Right.
This one does have a very compelling, page-turning, it's a murder, suspense, thriller story at its heart. Right. And so I think if you could give up your, feeling verklempt about some of these other issues, you could get into the story. And I think some people were more willing to give over to that than others, I shouldn't say willing, that they found it entertaining.
Yeah. Well, and for some, there's some books I just won't read that are like extremely homophobic, or that depict extreme homophobic reactions and abuse. Like, I just won't read them, even though they're contemporary and they're very important. I just don't want to go there for my own personal preference and mental health. And that's not saying anything about anybody else's reading of those types of books. We just wanted to comment on the interesting things that we thought we saw with different generations reading this one, and then my own lack of being able to continue on with the women's room. But that's the only one that I DNF'd, and there was one I didn't get to. Oh, actually, there's one that I started that I didn't finish, but I planned to. So Mary, Queen of Scots, I read the first part of it. So there are 3 big parts, and I had decided I'm not going to make myself just like zip through this. I'll read the next section when I'm feeling like it. Yeah.
Which is fun to know too. Like, you set that, this big book summer read starts Memorial Day and ends Labor Day. And it's nice to try to get to them, but also to say, like, I'm not going to give up on the book, but I know that I'm not going to get it read during this time period. And that's okay too.
Yeah. And I think, like, it's really cool because this first section is all about some background to the Stuarts and what was going on in Scotland and England and France as well. And then Mary, up until she's like 19, and she's widowed, her husband, who's going to be the King of France, or was the King of France, dies very young. So here she is leaving on a ship from France to Scotland, where she hasn't been like since she was 4 years old, to become Queen of Scotland.
No
So
pressure.
that's where I left that. And then, so more to come on that in the future. But I did not get to another one that was on my list, The Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki, which is a book that Sean Reads Books had sent to me a long time ago when he was living in Japan. He said it was one of his favorites, and I know I'm going to read that one when the time is right. So it is still sitting on it's actually on my book cart, which is, books that I feel like are going to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That's why we called that last video Hopefuls.
Yeah, Hopefuls.
The one that I regret not getting to at all this summer is Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat by Samin Nosrat. I have the audiobook and the hard copy, and I didn't take it with me to Michigan, and so nothing happened out of that. So that's sad. And then the other one that I had was A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, which of all the books I talked about on that video got the most enthusiasm from people. And I know that was it the fourth or the fifth book came out in the series this summer?
I think maybe the fifth.
The fifth,
I'm
yeah.
100% though.
And I had it in my hands. I started the first chapter and thought, this isn't the book for me to read right now. It just wasn't grabbing me. And I knew with so many people saying it was wonderful that I just wasn't reading it at the right time. Yeah. So I'm going to try it again and maybe get it on audio also. Trying to do it both.
Very interesting. And maybe we should go to like Sterling Library at Yale, which is this old, it's not that old. It was built in the 20s, but it's Gothic. It's Gothic revival, so maybe reading that opening scene where they're in the library, in a cool library.
Okay.
Maybe that'll do it for you.
I'll try.
Yeah.
I'm game. So what are you going to read this weekend?
Well, I am in the midst of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. I've never read this one, and I'm doing a buddy read with Sigrid on this one, and I am almost to the halfway point and really enjoying it. I didn't know what the heck was going on at the very beginning, which I think that's kind of standard for Dickens novels, especially the first chapter. You don't really understand what's going on, and then it starts slowly making sense. And in this book, it is about the French Revolution. So he takes the two cities is what's happening in Paris, in a neighborhood in Paris, and then what's happening in Soho, a neighborhood in London. And there are characters who kind of go back and forth. There's treachery and murder, and I'm beginning to figure out who is doing what and what's going on. And, these stories of his were serialized, so they're relatively shortish chapters. And it just really hit me that what it must have been like to read these when they came out in such a serialized way, that people would be talking about it. Like, what do you think happened? What was that about? And who did this? And what's going to happen with that? Kind of like, people streaming Netflix right now, right? With the hot new series, when you have to wait for the next episode to come out, if it's one of those that doesn't release them right away. So I felt that with this one.
Yeah.
And I read Bleak House a couple of years ago, and I didn't quite feel that as much. Maybe because that story, you also didn't really know what's going on, because it's kind of a mystery type thing. But this one, with the back and the forth and the revolution, they're on the eve of the revolution. It's pretty cool. Plus, it's that double layer, right? This is historical fiction written about the 1700s in the 19th century. So the 1800s. So it's kind of cool to have that layer going on. So that's what I'll be reading. How about you?
I have a book, thanks to our mystery man, John Valeri. He posted a picture of his beautiful little free library in front of his house, and this was face out in the picture. And I said, oh, I really want to read that book. And he said, would you like me to keep it for you? I'm meeting Chris for dinner this week. And I said, sure. And here it is. I'm so excited. This is Swan Song by Ellen Hildebrand. It's the fourth and final book in her Nantucket series, which I have not read. I'm going to step in. Maybe this is the new Emily. I'm reading books in series at the very end. So, and what's cool about this, it's the Nantucket Special Edition, and it has these beautiful end papers.
Love that.
Nantucket is an island off the coast of Massachusetts, right? And so it's very, islandy themed things. I have no idea what this novel is about. I know that she often writes about love and romance. I've read 2 of her novels, so it looks like it's got some water in it with the woman jumping off a boat. I'm game.
Yeah.
I just finished Demon Copperhead, speaking of Charles Dickens, because it's a retelling of David Copperfield, and I need a little bit of a palate cleanser, which I'm hoping this will provide.
A little fun in the sun.
Yes,
splashing
exactly.
in the water. Yeah.
Let us know what you're reading. We would really like to know in the comments down below, and
we wish you lots of
happy reading. Whee!